This is The Creative, a podcast of authentic discussion with industry pros.
Well, my name is Daniel Vogel. Currently, I am an editor for a true crime series called Fatal Attraction. Um, I've been doing that for about 6 months. Prior to that, just a lot of A work and editing gigs here and there. A lot of moving. Went from LA to Austin, back to LA to Nashville to Knoxville. Um, all in search of that perfect situation, which is good pay, cushy job, things like that. People I meet when I work with them, I try and stay in contact with them, try and constantly see what they're doing, just stay in their mind. But mainly word of mouth for me. I'm not a big Instagram peddler or whatever. I don't know much about that, but maybe I need to get better at it.
Do you have a website?
I do.
Or like a Vimeo or anything?
I don't have a personal website. I just have a Vimeo. It's just vimeo.com/dvogel.
And that hunts for you, like that when you share and talk with people, that works. That's fine.
It does work. I mean, I guess a lot of my work has been in post, so it's been extended periods of time at one job than the other. Tend to either move with someone or use a contact that I've met at previous jobs to get to the next thing. But I think here where I'm at a place where I'm doing something and I'm continuously editing and working with programs and stuff, so that's good. But I'm not feeling the creative need that I feel like I've always had, which is like when you and we did that thing with Lindsay or whatever, or stuff like that. Filming, I like to get behind the camera and I like to chop it up when it's done. So I think going forward, I'm gonna need to get a little more into a bigger presence in other places. But as far as like continuing to work, word of mouth and just keeping in contact and constantly letting people know I'm available even if I'm not available, kind of thing.
Yeah. That's interesting that you bring up like the project with Lindsay, because I think, because when I met you, you had moved around a little bit, and you were living in Austin by the time I had moved there, and then we met at Meglo Media when we were working the same job, same department. You had a different job than me, and I had a different one from you. But like those side projects were like so important to being able to build a network and kind of hang out with people. Do you find that true in Knoxville and other places that you've been, or is that like a uniquely Austin thing?
Interestingly enough, I would say that at a quick glance, at least, I think Austin was the place that was very specific to. The reason being, so when I lived in Los Angeles the first 9 years, I was getting my bearings. You're in Los Angeles, you're small fish in a big pond kind of thing. So when I got work, decent work, it was stuff that I would that's what I did, and I lived my life outside of that. On occasion I would get involved in like doing a thing, but it was more of just personally driven, nothing where it was like a group of people getting together and like pretty much no cost kind of thing. Everybody donated their time, the equipment they had, things like that. I had that in Austin. When I went back to Los Angeles after leaving Austin, I tried to get that going and actually embarked on some things with people. It just kind of fell apart. Everybody wanted to know how can I get paid? What am I going to get paid? This and that. It wasn't a passion project.
Mm-hmm.
So here in Knoxville, I've only been here 6 months. I will say that the two people next door to me, they work at Discovery. And they're composers. We've been talking about maybe trying to get together and collab on something, maybe to cross our worlds together. We're not sure, but I feel like the Austin's film community, at least at the time that we were there, those like 4 years of that around that time were, it's like the most outside of work thing I've been a part of. Like, because with Lindsay, I did like a couple music videos. I did some other things. I shot that thing with the Life Without Color that's on Amazon with Rob.
Yeah.
Dane, and the best thing about it is, um, those projects that I worked on in Austin, I worked with a lot of the same people and then a lot of the different people. And as those projects came, it was almost like being able to figure out, okay, yeah, I really want to work with this guy because one, he's into it, and like, you know what I mean? Like you kind of weed your way and find these are the people that are like would work well together, this group. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, oh, I'd pass the camera to that guy, no problem, whatever it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but that's one of the things that comes with like that passion project space, though, is that you're going to bring together a team, and that not everybody's got the same skill sets, and you're going to have some like real weird outliers of people that kind of get it, kind of don't. You've got people that are really talented, and it's really unusual because like I think in the workspaces that we've been in, all of kind of the volatility of different skill levels is shaken down and it's gone. And that was one of the things that was always really wild and interesting about the passion projects. You mentioned you've tried to get it up off the ground. It's like it doesn't always get off the ground.
It doesn't. You got to think about, like, if you don't have the camera equipment or you don't have this, you either got to find someone to work with that's really amped on it, that wants to lend their equipment to the production, or you got to find a way to rent it. So yes, a lot of times it doesn't even get off the ground. A lot of times, if you're the person organizing it or thinking it through, coming up with the idea or whatever, it just never makes it any further than this constant. I have a lot of things that I constantly am like, man, it pops into my, like, the same project idea pops into my head a lot, pops into my head a lot. Projects I've thought of 5 years ago where like they pop into my head again, like, and maybe it's gotten better over time in my mind. Now that I'm thinking of it, I have a better way of doing it or a better idea, but it's getting that thing onto paper and then so on and so forth has become the challenge.
Um, your career growth, like the work that you do day to day, does that make it easier to kind of be like, does that expand your mind enough? Because I think you, me, and a lot of people that might be listening that have worked in the creative space, your career is just like littered with the wreckage of half finished things. And do you think the career that you've been on and the jobs that you have make it easier to look back at those half finished things and go, now I see the missing piece? Or is it just from your mindset? It's just the nature of the perspective, man. There's always going to be casualties. Or how do you?
I think both, man. I think I was an assistant editor, so I would say that the time that I've spent editing since then, actually doing that as my profession, that constant, control keys, constantly using the program. I feel like as you edit more, you get better at pacing, or you get better at seeing things and saying, "Oh, I know what music to put to this," because you have, you know what I mean? You have those things that become almost like a muscle, like you work them out.
Maybe that's a way of like from a technical perspective thinking about it like technique, like your ability to be fluid in the programs or the fluid with the tools.
Sure, yeah, and I think the more you do that, that may help you in the instance of coming back to something you may have been cutting where it's maybe you just weren't that good at cutting then and you couldn't figure out how to piece it together. I mean, I can tell you 100%, actually doing editing as my full-time job and not AEing and then doing editing on the side, it's definitely made a huge difference for seeing different ways that I can put footage together. Footage that maybe back then I could throw them on a timeline, but they may not look good. There may not be a pace to it. There may not be a flow to it, or, so I do think that constantly doing a job and over those years coming back to projects, I do think that helps further things along. But I also do think that there are those casualties where, like, it was wrong from the start. Say I filmed something, it was a great idea, but the footage I filmed then the opportunity I had, I just wasn't skilled enough to make it what it needed to be to get to what I wanted. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. That makes a whole lot of sense.
Recently, last year, my buddy and I, my old roommate in Los Angeles, he played pro baseball, and ended up getting released and decided he was going to be a writer, actor, blah, blah, blah. We were working on this reality show of this dude who is he's part of the Hollywood Men. So he's basically a male review dancer. He also was a pro ball player, semi-pro football player, all this stuff. And now he's a male review dancer. So we were making this reality show, and I was coming out to shoot some scenes for it, coming out to Los Angeles. He had this idea, like, maybe we should film some baseball stuff. He gives hitting lessons now. My buddy that played pro ball, he gives hitting lessons. I spent 4 days of interviewing people and filming baseball stuff, and what was supposed to just be like, let's get some footage and see what we can do, turned into a show pitch, a show idea. We called it Little Big Leaguers. It's basically dance moms for baseball, like, baseball dads getting in fights with umpires, the way these 8-year-old kids are drafted and brought through leagues, and just the whole inner workings and everything. And we ended up making a teaser. We've been pitching the show. And that all came from, like, let's just interview people. We had the idea of dance moms, baseball dads kind of thing.
See, I think that's your Austin showing a little bit, because like that's the type of production that I've really found a lot of joy in here in the city, is that where it's like I've got like 4 ideas that are pretty close together, but they're not like a whole thing yet. Let's go take some smart brains out with a camera and just start figuring it out. Like, yeah, sure, sometimes it doesn't work, but when it comes together, it feels so good. It's like magic. And now you got a show pitch.
Exactly. And not only that, like, going along for that ride and being a part of that forces you to wear hats that you normally wouldn't wear. And I think that over time, you end up with a new skill, which at times you could discover that this is not only what I absolutely am enjoying doing, but I'm good at it. The guy that I filmed this with, like, I noticed over time, like, he was doing story producing, and not only was he doing story producing, like giving notes and things, like he was restructuring and all these things. Like, he really actually came into the role of doing story producing like he could do it professionally somewhere else. You know what I'm saying? Like, he kind of stumbled into it and he loves it. And that was just, being a part of the production, and it just fell into that role.
You're talking about going around and shooting, and even like when I met you when we were doing Gauntlet, and even earlier, and just when we're talking in this episode, you're saying I started as an assistant editor, and here you are shooting something. I mean, you don't have the financials behind it, but you're basically executive producing this pitch, trying to get it to land somewhere. Yeah. And that's such an expansion of your horizons, and such a growth of your mindset around what media production is.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The amount, it's crazy the amount of hats that came along with that, or that was one of those things where it was like I had a daytime job where I could just go to work and come home and not do anything, but I was excited to get home from work to work on that, which was, like you said, there's no funding. It's all just like you start to see it come together and you're like, oh, this is really something. Like, it can be something. Through this guy being a pro ball player and whatever, and he gives these hitting lessons to people, we ended up meeting a lot of executives and things that work at companies, and then you learn then you learn the ebbs and flows of pitching a show and being told no.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, well, we're looking for something stupid specific, and we're trying to reach this very focused audience, and we've got these, and he's just like, shit, man, you just want like a custom piece, and you're just rolling the dice waiting for somebody to show up.
Oh yeah. I mean, there was some people that told us what it was they felt that it was lacking, or that they wanted to see. We made changes and came back to them with it. It's still in flux, I guess. Maybe a full re-edit and make a new deck for it. But either way, I think it's a cool idea. Maybe it's just a niche show, but it was awesome going out there with minimal equipment. And like you're saying, like I interviewed these people. I chose the shots to shoot and things like that. So I did learn a lot about producing in a way, and it just came as part of the role. It kind of fell into my lap, and
Well, and that's what's really cool because like when you are in a group of people where you can take those passion projects and kind of run them like a serious job, like run them like a real gig or get as close as you can, when that's the mindset in place, because you see people at the beginning of their career that are working like hourly jobs, waiters and call centers. And this is how they get started. And here you and I are sharing stories about how this is how you go from middle to high.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. So, do you feel that your experience, like you had to do all that stuff, all the things you did before to be able to do what you're doing now, or do you think you could have just had the knowledge of how things work and you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I'm really new to a lot of this. Like, I'm so new to this level of management. I call my friends and I say, I don't know how to cope with this. Somebody help me. So, like, I think sometimes it just depends on what day you ask me. Is whether or not it's like a really satisfying fit or whether it's a really tough fit. I don't know. And with that, I don't know if, like, kind of on my emotional level, on my tough days, I'm definitely sitting there going, man, I fucking wasted years. I didn't need any of this to manage people. I needed an entirely different skill set. And then on the good days, I'm like, dude, there's no way I would have sunk this basket if I didn't know what I knew and if I didn't put in the years of investment that I did. But yeah, I do think long term the years are worthwhile. It's just on a shitty day, man, nothing feels like you did as good.
Yeah. I could 100% see it being everything that you've been through and that you've done. You know, you may run into a certain situation you've experienced before, but now you're talking someone through it versus doing it yourself. I think you could just talk to someone differently when you've been there and you've done that, and you, or not in a sense of like, oh, I've done that, you know what I mean? But like, you know what I mean? Like your
Yeah,
battle.
sometimes and when I sit down with creatives that are working on our brand projects, especially the external ones, because that's where most of my experience has been, I sometimes know when to give a little bit extra context that maybe somebody that didn't come up through it wouldn't, because then I'm like, oh, if I give them just a little bit of a peek behind the curtain to clarify the context, I know they're going to work that much harder to nail something great because
Yeah.
now they've got a better understanding of the why behind my ask. And
Yeah.
I think if you're coming out of it where you don't have that intimate practitioner's knowledge, you're way less certain about when you give peeks behind the curtain because you don't know if it's a good one or a bad one. But that to say all of that, like I don't think anything that I know prevents somebody else from falling into a role of producer. You're even talking about your friend that you're shooting this stuff with. He kind of came out into it as a surprise, but he was able to draw from enough other life experiences that story producing clicked.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of truth behind that too. Is like, and I think that's part of sometimes why when I have a hard day, I really reflect negatively on these things because I'm like, man, anybody could do this once they absorbed enough context. It's not super deep. And then there are the other days where you're working with a creative where you're trying to thread a really specific needle. And it's just like, oh, yeah, the years really counted today.
Yeah, I could see that.
Like you, the type of production work where I've been a leader has been in many ways like a first among equals. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily better or worse. You're kind of deputized to be the immediate decision maker. And you might have just centimeters more clarity in a direction than the person next to you, and they're happy to pass off the responsibility. And that's the place that I've led well, is kind of from that peer leadership group. I'm used to people having a much deeper production context. No, I mean the weird thing is that we spend all these years to get super intimate with all of this shit, and then you've got to come up for air. And when you come up for air and you go back into kind of the world of people that are normal and don't understand media production, that's when it gets really dicey because it's like all the stuff I know about media codecs and transcoding and how this translates into publishing and being able to marry graphics cards to cameras. All of that is important. None of it matters in the meetings that I'm a part of. And
Right.
so then it's like when somebody says, well, let's go send a camera out to shoot something and then we can edit it here in the laptop on an office. Like there's this chain of thoughts that fire off where it's like, well, shit, for us to pull that off on a laptop, we better be making sure that our camera is not too nice. It's also not too shitty.
Yeah.
that we're making sure that we're getting the right kind of laptop to make sure to work with the camera, and then that the codecs that are on the card. I know that our production schedule doesn't afford us transcoding, and we don't have the capacity to handle something like proxies. So we better fucking land on a compatible codec and a compatible camera at the beginning, and then we can do the rest of it super smooth. So a marketing team who moves at the speed of business doesn't have to worry about why is their video taking like a technical stumble and taking way longer than it should. But so all of that knowledge matters, but like it's also weird. It does not show up day to day.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. But I will say that being on the other end of stuff coming back from the field that did not have that person such as yourself to know the things that, you're the things you're doing behind the scenes, to not having someone like you when it gets to the person who has to deal with it all, as far as like processing, like you said, or you don't allow time for, you don't have that kind of time to do transcodes or proxies and all these things. That's a game changer, man. Because I just I was working at this place, and it took a new post supervisor to realize like that not only do I do what I do, but I've filmed, and I know my way around a camera. And so after a while, they would come and ask me these things, but it's at times they still wouldn't come back right because the communication was not there.
Yeah.
But I think that having someone that can check everything right out of the gate to make sure you're operating efficiently, it changes the game all the way through in the rest of the process. You know what I mean?
But I mean, but we also know that not having that knowledge, sure, like the work is more difficult, but plenty of projects have sailed through with technical ignorance at the helm. That's always kind of the give and take, especially that I found in like the more marketing heavy world, that there's always this kind of balancing act between deep wells of knowledge and fuck it, man, we just got to go.
Let's just get it done.
Yeah, let's just get it done. Let's just keep rocking. We'll fix it on the next one. Which is kind of cool because, as creatives, we can always overindulge ourselves, go, no, it's not quite right. No, we got to open this back up. No, let's just go back to that one thing.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of nice to have just this like momentum that you can't control. It's just tough when production kind of runs afoul of it because it's this big, lumbering, messy beast, even after all of these decades.
Right. Yeah.
So is producing something that you're aiming for? Like, is that one of kind of like the side things that you're growing through these passion projects, the ability to kind of keep moving up the ladder yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it was never my one main goal. I love editing and it's great, but I absolutely love being on set. I mean, it's two different types of creativity. Editing takes creativity, and it takes us, a mind to work a certain way. But I feel like being on set, it's not it's a different type of creativity, but it's also an active situation. A lot of times it's mind melts and pulling from other people's information to get to an end goal. So I mean, producing and or being behind the camera again, like full time, like doing that and only that would be an ultimate goal. And if it's not as my physical job, then working towards making that my physical job. Definitely being back on set, whether it's producing or editing, or shooting. The one thing that I'll always struggle with in any sense is like, if I'm there producing something, I'd have to keep myself from wanting to go do the camera. Or if I'm reviewing footage, keep myself from wanting to edit it. Because in my mind, I guess it's like, well, if I'm doing it, I'm doing it. Like I'm just doing it. I don't have to tell anybody. I don't have to whatever. That's just kind of an urge I have. Like I want to do all the things, I think.
That's a familiar urge. And man, I talk to so many people on the podcast, and like I get this thread amongst the people that are independent. That urge is huge. It is the lens for which it's all seen through. Is like I want to do all the things. How do I keep staying successful while doing all the things?
It's weird. So my brother's an actor. he doesn't ever want to do anything outside of acting. Like, he has a lot of downtime in between projects. He could produce, he could write, he could do anything, but he doesn't seem to have an urge. But if he goes too long in between projects, he starts to get really creatively starved. But I think it's just for that one thing, which is acting. Whereas, and maybe this is a technical versus artsy or whatever kind of thing, but like when I'm doing editing, it's great for a little bit, but then it's like, all right, I'd like a change in pace, whether it's maybe a different type of editing, different reality to scripted or whatever it is. Or I'd like to be behind a camera doing that for a little bit. You know what I mean? Like there's always these urges, different things, and you're always trying to satisfy a creative urge. At least I am.
Do you think the software we use fuels that? Because like I found that it was really easy for me to grow my knowledge set through the Adobe Creative Suite and other programs and just kind of circuit all of that post-production world. Because it was like the moment I understood, and this dates us a little bit, but it's like the moment I understood Final Cut 7, I was like, cool, now I can open up After Effects. The After Effects work pressured me to open Photoshop more, even though I had dabbled for a long time. And it's like, cool, now I'm up to 3 programs. Migrate to Premiere, start interacting with vector assets. Now I have Premiere and Illustrator. And it just kept kind of growing the skill set. So as again, this whole like expansion of mind made it really easy for me to go like, I want to do all of these things because I understand how they're done. And in my role, I had to kind of do them anyway.
For one, I think if someone's using Adobe Suites, I think that the sky is the limit for that person as far as, especially if you're doing your own projects, you need to dive into things like that. You'll be forced to learn to do those things because if not, you're subbing it out or you just can't do it. As far as Avid is concerned, if we're just talking about Avid, as far as like technology and expanding your skill set, I think that Avid has it's been similar to itself for years. There's obviously software you can get with it, and if you do Symphony, you can learn color, and that's professional color. But I think as far as like technology and programs helping people to make that leap and expand their knowledge, I think that especially Adobe, that's 100% true. I mean, I don't use Adobe currently, but when I had the suite, I mean, I found myself jumping into programs that I didn't even know what they did just to see. And then when I realized what it was, I found myself going back to it and just trying to learn, just using it for the functions I knew, but then trying to learn some things. Generally, you learn a program, any of those programs, they're going to help you along the way, whether you're an editor or a sound editor or knowledge of those other things are going to push your skill set or help you down the road when you need to do something and you know how to do it already because you've learned the program and such. Yeah, I think that the Adobe Suite is a game changer for especially people who want to learn.
Yeah. Whenever you sit down with an editor that has spent time in Los Angeles or an editor that in another city has spent time working in a real production house, they're like, done, man. Avid is not going anywhere. You may never see it superficially day to day in kind of smaller tier projects, but there seems to be no worry about the longevity of the platform. But do you see some of this like Adobe jack of all trades encroachment just because there's so many people training up in this I've got to wear 12 hats kind of mindset?
I do think it's interesting. And in my moves in the past couple of years and my search for possibly taking on different roles, I've seen a lot of, and maybe this isn't in Los Angeles as much as it is smaller markets. I think that I've also ran into a lot of Adobe people that are like super fluent in a lot of Adobe things. But then when I tell them, well, the job's an Avid job, they don't even want to submit their resume. I will say that if you know how to use one or the other, you can definitely make your way and probably do a successful job at editing or doing whatever you're doing. if you have knowledge of Avid and you go to Premiere, you may find that you could do more in Premiere than you could going from Premiere to Avid as far as your knowledge. If you had never used Avid and you only use Premiere and I sat Avid in front of you, the way it operates, it's just kind of tough to it's tough to navigate through. Whereas I think Premiere, it navigates well. I think the color and all the motion and all these things that they have available to you, you'd fare well going from Avid to Premiere. I just don't know a lot of people. I've run into a lot of people that are just strictly Premiere, strictly Adobe, and they don't even want to submit their resume, or I had to learn Avid again, which was like a daunting task. I was going from Final Cut Pro to Avid when Megalo Media made the switch. It had been so long that I felt like I was learning all over again. I do think in color correction and in post work, people with all that Adobe knowledge can find themselves in positions, jobs more frequently than someone who's just strictly an Avid editor, unless you're looking to just do this show, just work here and just do this reality show or this crime show or this, you know what I mean? Yeah, that's.
Anyway, I really appreciate your time, and I don't know, man. Is there anything else you want to throw out there, or anything else you want to get in before I hit kill on the recording?
I mean, I'm having a baby.
Yeah, congratulations, dude. It's
Yeah,
gonna
man.
be so exciting.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for letting me do this with you.
Awesome, right on. I am going to hit stop recording.